Hey, it's Eric Lee with VictorEric Design+Build. Welcome back to our channel. We just lived in this house. Hey, it's a heritage home on Commercial Drive. You're curious about how that works? We'll tell you right now. So we're here in our Commercial Drive Heritage Home renovation where we lifted an entire house. Curious about what's involved with that? Let's go inside, talk to our site super, and we'll dive into all the details about that. Okay, so we are inside the basement now where we've lifted it already, and I've got Zach here, our site super for the job. Zach is gonna help us answer some technical questions all about house lifting. So first of all, let's dive into why do people even want to do this, because it's totally very complicated. So there must be really good reasons as to why we even lift an old house, right?
Well, one would be definitely, especially older houses like this, and the one we've done before, is the foundation doesn't have proper footings, or even sometimes it's out of stone or mortar, not concrete.
Right.
So you want to build a proper foundation to bring the house up to size, or better for seismic. Also, by lifting the house, you can usually lower the basement significantly to get a proper headroom, because a lot of Vancouver homes typically are under 7 foot high in the basement.
Right. Yeah. And what Zach is talking about is in Vancouver and most other cities, you will have a maximum building height. And the old homes, especially turn of the century homes, were quite tall already. So oftentimes what you'll find is that you are at that maximum rate or even exceeded. So city's gonna say, well, no, you can't lift it anymore. But if you're stuck with, like, for instance, a 6-foot ceiling, instead of going up, which you can't, you have to go down. And that's what Zach's talking about, right? We can lift the house up, build a new foundation, much better than the old rubble foundations that you find in turn of the century homes. And then when we're building a new foundation, we just build it deeper, right? Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about how this actually works. For our viewers out there, like you and I, we're in the industry, we know it, we do it all the time, but technically, maybe explain it in a simple way how this whole thing works.
So usually you start, once you got everything in order and you know what's happening, usually you start by stripping the house. Anything that is not going to be kept needs to be removed to make the house as light as possible. Mm-hmm. Then you bring in the lifting crew and their engineer, and then you have to brace the inside of the house to prevent the house from moving during the lift, racking, shifting, to prevent any movement in the house during the lift. Once that's done, then we come in, we set our cribs down to the new height we want, bring in our steel beams on top, and then we use those steel beams and 8-inch by 8-inch lumber dunnage to build cribs to lift the whole house up. Then once the house is lifted high enough, we can access for excavation. Then we come in, remove the foundation, excavate, do all the underground work we need, frame out the walls, and then we lower the house back down once we're ready for that.
Right. What equipment are they using to lift this? Like, is it it's a truck, obviously, but how do they lift?
So they usually use a crane to bring the beams in and a lot of the material in. Once the material's in and they're set up, they use 20 or 30 ton bottle jacks to what they call crack the foundation. So that's where you actually separate the existing walls from the foundation to lift the house off the foundation. The initial amount we call cracking the foundation. We lift with bottle jacks. Once it's up off the foundation, then they switch to hydraulic jacks run by the truck.
Okay.
So instead of moving, it takes an hour to move 2 inches ball jacks. When the hydraulic jacks are set up, you can move probably 6 inches every 20, 30 minutes.
Right.
So it's a lot quicker. Then that's how you bring your house up to your desired height.
So yeah, now that we've got the house lifted up, probably lifted higher than what we actually need in the final, we're going to start working around and building a new foundation, right? Why don't you walk us through that process?
So when we put the cribs in for the original house lift, we have to make sure they're in the right location so they won't interfere with any concrete foundation work we need to do to put the house back down. So we choose the locations, build them once the house is up. Then we bring an excavator in, they tear out the old foundation, dig everything to new. We do our grade, get our engineers to check all the grade, make sure it's all 100% ready to go and there's no issues. And then we build our foundation and we pour it. And after we pour it, then we frame up the walls around us up to the desired height we want for the house. And then we lower the house back down onto the new walls. And as you can see, some of the cross braces, we always cross brace these walls to make sure they can't move when the house is being lowered again. And then we keep them in place until we are finished framing.
Right. And I would say that It's not just a matter of lifting the house and then setting the exact house back on a new foundation. While the house is up and while we've gutted a lot of the excess weight, we're going to take that opportunity to do a few more upgrades, like for instance, the perimeter tile, right? What other upgrades are we doing while we're doing this lift?
So for this lift, we are redoing all the plumbing and all the electrical throughout the whole house. That's standard for older house because the plumbing and electrical is 100 years old in some cases. Another thing we do is it gives us the opportunity to change the floor layout. So originally this basement had a lot of walls, a lot of partitions, a big blocked out in the middle for their heating, their hot water tank, etc.
Right.
By redoing this and redoing the beams and the framing, we can now adjust to a much more open concept, more modern style of layout for the house. And we can do that throughout the whole house during this renovation because we have everything open and we're redoing all the structural beams to new code compliance.
Yeah, and what Zach is talking about is the old homes, they had much smaller joists and posts and studs, for instance. There's the old adage that, oh, they never built like they used to. That only really refers to the actual lumber because it was more solid and more robust. But there's a lot of new codes that new homes have to meet compared to the old ones. For instance, seismic, right? Earthquake. The old homes never had consideration for that. So when you build a new home, you need certain seismic plywood, seismic walls for lateral bracing and stuff like that. So we take the opportunity while the house is gutted to do that. That's why when you look around here, you'll see pretty much all of the lumber, except for a few spots, is new, right? We're able to keep some of them, but not much.
Yeah, usually we retain of the existing lumber all the exterior walls and all the existing floors, just the joists and the most of these weren't plywood, they were shiplap back in the day. And then what we call a sister, where we add a larger support to modern standards beside the old support and laminate them together to create a much stronger support for each floor.
Yeah, so you'll see some here where we've got a really dark floor joist, and then right beside it is a light floor joist, taller, deeper. That's what Zach's talking about, where we put a new joist right beside the old one to make it stronger, sistering it. And then also, while we've got the house gutted and lifted and all that, we're going to take an opportunity to upgrade the insulation, because back then, these homes, turn of the century, never had any insulation. You're lucky to find some newspaper inside the walls. So now what we do is we've got everything. We're going to add insulation either to the inside or the outside of the stud wall, but also of the concrete foundation. So really upgrading the performance to a new house spec performance, although it's an old heritage character look. Tell me a bit about that process, the upgrading the thermal valve.
Okay, so there's a couple options. For this house here, we opted because of the restrictions with neighboring properties to put the insulation on the inside of the foundation. And then we build frost walls and then insulate the inside. We also upgrade the existing 2x4 walls of the house to either 2x6 or 2x8 walls to increase to almost double or even triple sometimes of the R value of the insulation effectiveness.
Right. Yeah, and what Zach's talking about with this side yard is you can't just add exterior insulation. You have to make sure that it's conforming to the setback after the installation. And that's where we come in. Because we're a fully integrated design build team, we'll look at all the zoning implications for what we're planning to do. We'll help you take it through the permits, manage it through construction, manage it through the trades, the building envelope engineer and the energy consultant. So all those are very complicated things that you really will be better served with a design build integrated team like us. Great, thanks for sharing with us how it's done. What about timeline? How long does this whole process take from a construction part to lift the house?
So if you look from when the house is ready to be lifted and the trade comes in and tells us what to cross brace and then we lift, typically they come in about 2 weeks before we lift the house. Tell us what we do. We do any framing, any extra walls, bracing, make sure the house is stable for the lift. Then once the house is lifted, it usually takes 1 to 3 days typically for a standard house, more if it's a larger building or more complex. Then I believe this house only took us 3 weeks from after it was lifted to be ready to lower it.
Right.
That is a little bit faster than typical, but you can usually expect somewhere between 4 4 to 6 weeks for a typical house before the date of lift to the date of bringing it back down, as long as everyone's availability is.
Right. And just to clarify, in that 3 weeks, is that when we're doing the new foundation, we're casting it, we're upgrading any structure that we need, doing the permanent drainage?
So that is excavation, removal of old foundation. That is bringing in, ensuring grade is correct, building the foundations, pouring the foundations, make sure the engineer is happy with everything, reinforce everything, and then building the pony walls and prepping for the house to come down.
Okay.
Sometimes you can do the drain tile before or after the house is lowered. In this case, we did it after because of our timeline and people's schedules.
Right. Okay, great. How about risk? Are there any risks we should know about when we're lifting a home?
Well, because it's a renovation, there's always the risk of finding something when you demo the house that you weren't expecting to find, or
Right.
something needs to be dealt with. For the actual lift of the house and back down, it's actually a very safe process because they always ensure, even when they're lifting, that there's never more than a 1.5 inch gap between their structural supports, their cribbage, and the roof of that and the house height. So they always ensure there's beams, and that way if something ever failed, say a bottle jack failed or hydraulic line failed, that it only has an inch to move, which was not a danger for the house.
Right.
Might scare you if it comes down, but it's not dangerous in any way.
Okay, so why don't we just leave off this video with just some final tips for people who have a character home or a heritage home and are thinking about doing something with it, whether it be a lift or not. What would you say some reasons or some tips for people to go ahead with a lift?
So, well, when we first came to this house before the lift, the ceilings in the basement were quite low. They were only about 6'6" high, 6'8". Like I could walk under, but I had to duck underneath the beams. It was not very well laid out, and there wasn't a lot of usable space down here. By lifting up the house and lowering the foundation, we've now maintained an 8-foot ceiling height for most of the basement. So it's a lot more comfortable to live in, and then also we've really opened up. Most of what you see behind me is going to be one open living room kitchen area for a basement suite, and then where you can't see the camera is going to be the bedroom and the bathroom, but it's a lot more open and functional.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing is by retaining a existing home, you don't have to comply to the new square footage requirements by the city, which means you can usually maintain a larger home overall than you would if you built a new one.
Right. Okay, yeah, and I think that case specifically is very much a case by case, so reach out to us and we can help you with it. For instance, what Zach's talking about very much applies to those homes which was either grandfathered, meaning your square footage in the old house was larger than what you're allowed now. And the rule for most cities is as long as you don't increase the footprint, the exterior walls of the house, you can keep your existing square footage. You won't lose it. Versus building a new house. If you demolish this house and you built a new house, the total final square footage that you get would be smaller. So that's a case where when we lift homes, that's one big reason why we would do that. And yeah, so finally, let's just summarize those criteria for those of you who have a character home. Think about lifting or renovating a character home because either you have a grandfather situation where you have, let's say, over height and you want to keep it, or over square footage and you want to keep it. That's a good candidate for lifting. You've got a low ceiling height and you want to improve on it, but for instance, you can't push it any higher, then you gotta go down. And then a final reason would be if you had sentimental value to the home, whether it be you appreciate the character and the heritage, or maybe it was your long-time home in the family. For instance, we did one like that. Why don't you share with us?
Yeah, we did. The last house lift I did was for a lovely couple that had owned a home and raised their kids in it. So a tremendous sentimental value from them. So during the construction, because there's a lot of older heritage beams, large fir beams from the original construction, they saved some of them and they actually built a beautiful dining room table and a bench out of them, a side table in their living room, and they also used some of it to build a nice bench in their backyard in their garden as well. So if you want to retain parts of the house, you can always use some of the larger beams and incorporate those into your new home.
Yeah, and that project turned out phenomenal. The clients were so appreciative of what we did for them, and they kept those sentimental keepsakes and memoirs intact. So that was an excellent project.
Great, thank you for joining us on our How to Lift a House video. If you're doing something complicated like this, make sure you reach out to an experienced design build team like us, and we'll help you through that whole process. We are VictorEric, and we create amazing spaces.